Hey guys, I'm Chris Bach and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks. On this week's video, I'm immensely honoured to be the first guy to be able to show you this. The Origin Effects Revival Drive Compact. Now just to quickly delve into the background history of this pedal, because it definitely warrants giving it some context. Last year, Origin Effects released the Revival Drive. Now I actually did a video on the Revival Drive myself at the time, which I shall link above for those interested. But one of the points I made in that video, which I think still very much stands today, is that I don't think I've ever seen any pedal released to so much intrigue, so much speculation, so much polarization. You know what the guitar world is like. People are very quick to draw a line in the sand and make it abundantly clear on which side of that line they stood. People either loved it or they loathed it without necessarily even having tried it. Now, one of the common sort of misunderstandings, I guess, around the Revival Drive is what it actually was. I guess self-inflicted to a certain extent by Origin. It does say overdrive pedal on the front, and ultimately it is a fantastic overdrive pedal, but there is a lot more to it than just being a run-of-the-mill overdrive. Number one, it can act as a preamp, and a very good one at that. So if your amp goes down in a gig, as long as you have a cab sim and a power amp, you can run this directly to the front of house. Again, not something you could say of many overdrive pedals. Secondly, it has the ghosting feature, which was pretty innovative as far as I was concerned in an overdrive pedal, to be able to dial in a very unique sort of artifact that you would get with an old cranked valve amp. And thirdly, and most importantly, I guess, it had the capacity to be able to make it sound pretty much how you wanted it to sound with any amp. And you could make, again, a very strong case that because of that, all of the dip switches, all of the little toggles, all of the controls were necessary in order to really maximize its full potential. Needless to say, though, option paralysis could be a little bit of a problem with so many knobs, and that was one of the very common criticisms that was levelled at this pedal. There was a lot going on, and unless you were really willing to spend the time with it, you weren't necessarily going to get as much out of it as you maybe spent on it. So, as I said, you can see the thought processes that led to what is, in essence, a simplified, the smaller brother to the bigger brother of the Revival Drive. In regard to what's new, not very much, to be honest, which I would argue is a very positive point, in that they've pretty much carried all of the essential features from the Revival Drive over to the Compact. Definitely worth mentioning, however, there is now highs control. They've kind of met me halfway from one of my requests in my initial video, in that I said, as much as it is great having all of those controls on tap, one thing it really misses is having just a basic lows, mids and highs control, just to be able to get an approximation of your sound and then fine-tune it from there. As I said, they've met me halfway, and we now have a highs control, which got a lot of use in this demo. And we have then the EQ1 and EQ2, as you had on the old one, to be able to tailor it to whether you're using a dark amp or a bright amp. We have the preamp section as well. I'll demonstrate that a little bit later on. We also have an adjustment, which is new to this one, which really helps place that kind of fine-tune your bass response, I guess, or fine-tune your high response, depending on which way you look at it. Definitely worth mentioning that the gain is also now labelled as gain. On the old one, it was labelled as volume, which again, I think sort of just added to some of the general confusion around this pedal. How does it sound is a very valid question, and I'm glad you asked. As I said, the old Revival Drive I was a big fan of, and the only reason it didn't really stick around on my board longer than it did is that it's fairly big. I just didn't have the space for it. However, obviously, this is a lot smaller, so I definitely see this earning its place on my board very quickly. Ultimately, it has all of the sort of versatility and sounds that you had with the old Revival Drive, just in a slightly smaller enclosure, obviously without that second channel. Definitely worth mentioning the more presence control as well, which is a massive feature of this pedal. I gave a pretty vague, waffly explanation as to what that was last time, and to be honest, I still don't quite understand it now, so it's not going to be any more concise. Ultimately, the best way of thinking of it is that certain amps operate with something that you would call negative feedback. Great example being an AC30 or maybe some Fender Tweed models. Gives it a very distinctive characteristic of being slightly more aggressive, very tight sounding, just pretty unique. So we'll delve into that in some of the sounds now. Okay, as you wish. So the first sound that I've dialed up, I've really gone for that classic cranked AC30 tone. Think maybe Chris Shiflett from the Foo Fighters. I've dug the Telecaster out for this one, so we're going to get that sort of jangly, sparky, sort of dynamic, overdriven tone that you associate with maybe some of the later Foo Fighters stuff. While we're still on the AC30 side of the pedal, I'm going to dial back the blend control so we're bleeding in a little bit more of the clean tone of your signal. Dial the gain back a little bit, and we're going to try and capture a tone that I've been particularly envious for a very long time, and that is Mr. Dan Steinhardt's from that pedal show. Dan being a massive advocate of a Telecaster into an AC30, pushing it to the point where you're starting to get a little bit of natural breakup, but nothing too kind of uncontrollable. Just a fantastic sound. Sounds a little bit like this. Moving the more presence control into the presence side of things, we're going to be getting into that Marshall, sort of quintessentially British sounding territory. Think Marshall Plexi, I guess, ultimately. I'm going to keep the Telecaster on because you've heard how that sounds with the humbuckers and the Revstar at the start of the video. Sounds fantastic with the single coils as well. Sounds a little bit like this. Now, this is going to be infinitely more gain than I'm ever going to be likely to use, but it's definitely worth touching upon that Revival Drive does do a hell of a lot of gain. So if you're looking for that kind of sort of metal, not really, I guess British metal, kind of Tony Iommi kind of thing, it's got it in spades. And last but definitely not least, it's definitely worth touching upon, as I said, it's preamp capability. As I said, if you're stuck at a gig where maybe your amp is blown, providing you have a cab sim and an interface of some description, you can run this out to front of house, and this essentially becomes your amplifier. So the first clean sound you're going to hear is me basically just running it into a cab simulation with a little bit of reverb. I'm going to kick in the pedal, and that ostensibly becomes the amplifier. So there you have it. Hopefully just a quick overview of some of the sounds this pedal is capable of. As I said, I was a massive fan of the original Revival Drive. I think it kind of was unfortunate really that a lot of misunderstanding went on in regard to what it truly was and the capabilities it has. Fortunately, this has all of those capabilities to be able to dial it in and make it sound good with any amp, but in an infinitely more pedalboard friendly enclosure and a lot less of a price point as well. So if you're looking for something that has all of this feature set, I can't really think of anything else on the market that nails it, to be honest. Definitely worth checking it out. As ever, I've been Chris Buck. This is Friday Fretworks. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Check out the new tour dates down in the description box, and I shall see you next week for another episode. Cheers, guys. Take care, and I shall see you soon.